everyone? It is a wonderful, beautiful Monday. Thank you so much for joining us for Britt's Fantasy Blitz. I am, of course, your host, Britt Flinn. We've got a ton of stuff to get to today. Hairs up because it is serious time. There are only 2.5 weeks until the start of the NFL season. We had a ton of preseason action this weekend and lots to get to. Guys, if y'all are in the chat, please comment, please ask questions. We love to see you in there. And while you're there, like and subscribe to this channel and, set your notifications so you won't miss any of these shows as we get closer and closer to the NFL season. Like I said, we've got a lot to cover today. We've got a ton of news around the NFL. We're going to talk some underdog stat lines, and we are also going to be joined by Dustin Ludke of Dynasty Pros FF and Dynasty Nerds. So with that, let's just get to it. Hi, Mr. Scampers. Hi, Mr. Sellers. Thank you for joining us. So in top news today, Josh Jacobs is reportedly ending his holdout and will return to the Raiders facility. Now, the caveat about this is that he still has to sign his franchise tag and complete all the requirements before returning to the facility. So there's not really a set timetable. Although he says that he's going to be available week 1, we're not really sure when that's going to be. If you could see by the graphic right there, Jonathan Taylor is also set to return to the Colts this week, and he will play when he is medically cleared. So it seems whatever animosity there was between the team and the ownership has been buried, at least for the time being. The Buccaneers' Todd Bowles still has no timetable to name a starter, even after Baker Mayfield sat out against the Jets. Now, admittedly, Kyle Trask looked a lot better in his second game than he did in the first week, so it does look like the competition is still wide open, especially after backup to the backup John Wolford suffered a pretty severe injury this weekend. Prayers up to him for a speedy recovery, but right now, this quarterback competition is wide open. Finally, Aaron Rodgers is going to get the start against the Giants on Saturday. We'll finally get to see him in action and see if that offensive line that we've seen kind of crumble on Hard Knocks can hold up against the pressure. So some preseason highlights and news that happened over the weekend. The Colts made a rather curious decision to not start rookie quarterback Anthony Richardson this weekend. Yes, they've already named him the starter, but for someone who was knocked for his lack of game experience, is this the right call? Personally, I would rather see him in action and see him get some reps before the records actually start to matter. I get the need to keep him healthy, especially with all these injuries happening around the league, but it won't matter if he's healthy if he can't get those wins against real life opponents. Another rookie that absolutely shined this weekend was Bijan Robinson. Yes, he only played a limited amount of snaps, but he looked every bit like the star against the Bengals. He didn't get a ton of work, like I said, but man, he made the most of it. He had a one-handed grab that was thrown just a little bit behind him that he took downfield. He had a 5 yards per carry average. He just looked the part, and I'm very excited to see what the Falcons can do with him once the season actually begins. Another running back that actually made some waves was Steelers backup running back Jaylen Warren, and the Steelers offense actually looked pretty good. Warren broke out for a 62-yard touchdown run. Kenny Pickett found his Mr. Reliable Pat Freiermuth in the end zone for another score. Matt Canada actually looks to have developed his play calling ability, which was a big question mark going into this season. And yeah, this is just the preseason, but this looks very promising in a very competitive AFC North. Talking about another AFC team that's in the AFC East, the Buffalo Bills, man, they need to clean it up. Their penalties have been atrocious. 21 penalties over the first 2 preseason outings is not what you want to see from a Super Bowl contending team. Their offense looks really discombobulated, and their offensive line just looks horrible. Then you add into that an injury to one of their backup linemen. They have some serious stuff to work out. Right now, I'm actually taking the under on their win totals because they just look off, and they have a very, very difficult schedule against the rest of the AFC East and the NFC East. So speaking of looking bad, Can the Panthers' offensive line get any worse? They looked absolutely atrocious in their first two games. And if any quarterback in this league needs protection, it's Bryce Young. He's already small and undersized for a quarterback. I'm sure we've all heard that ad nauseum through the offseason. But if this line continues to give up hits and sacks, Young's going to have a very hard time staying on the field and staying healthy. Another quarterback that we don't really have answers to, but we're starting to see a little bit of is Jordan Love. He looked pretty good against the Patriots despite having an up and down joint practice earlier in the week. He went 5 of 8 with 84 yards and a touchdown, and some of those throws he made were absolute dimes. He hit Romeo Dubs downfield for a 42-yarder. He hit Jaden Reed for a touchdown. He hit Luke Musgrave a couple of times. I think that this offense may be clicking, and we might be underestimating the Packers just a little bit. Cowboys rookie Deuce Vaughn is still making an impression. He's starting off the game with a 14-yard run. And admittedly, after that, the offensive line couldn't really get anything going for him. But he has been getting steamed up in drafts. I think he went in round 15 in a couple of drafts I saw last night. People are in love with the pint sized running back. And it's going to be very interesting to see where he shakes up and ends up in this depth chart. Another running back that we thought may end up splitting work didn't really happen. Dameon Pierce of the Texans took every first team snap in the first two drives this weekend. And like I said, although we thought that this backfield may be a little more split than we've seen in the past with D'Amico Ryans at the helm, it looks like Pierce could have more of a bell cow role than we initially thought. Finally, Tank Bigsby is the clear RB2 on the Jacksonville Jaguars depth chart. He looked absolutely amazing. And Doug Peterson said after the game that he plans to incorporate Bigsby in more as the season progresses. Now, I'm not so sure if this means that ETN managers should be worried or that Bigsby owners should be excited, but either way, he's going to have some clear work and he's definitely a handcuff option that you want on your roster. So let's push forward to the game tonight. It's the final preseason game of week 2, the Baltimore Ravens at the Washington Commanders. And there are a couple questions we want to see out of this game. How much of Sam Howell will we see in action? If we do see him for an extended amount of time, can the Commanders' offensive line and pass protection keep him upright? Their offensive line was a big liability last year, and with a young quarterback, it will be interesting to see if they can protect him. It's also going to be interesting to see if head coach Ron Rivera made the right call by outright naming Hal the starter, or if there's a little bit more work to be done. Dame Overboard in the chat says, if Deuce is a pint, what is Derrick Henry? I would say that Derrick Henry is a mega keg, who shows no sign of slowing down or stopping. And on a side note, until he does, I'm continuing to draft Derrick Henry in nearly every league, especially in that round 3 area that you can still get him in. Another question about the Ravens and Commanders is, can the Ravens continue their 24-game preseason win streak? Washington Commanders offensive lineman Sam Cosmi doesn't care about it. Do we care about it? There's a give and take here when it comes to preseason, right? We love to see these win streaks. When we see these win streaks in preseason, we know that these teams are taking the game seriously, but it doesn't really matter in the long term. I'm actually of the opinion that the Commanders can beat the Ravens tonight because backup Tyler Huntley is dealing with a hamstring injury. We're going to see a lot of Josh Johnson, and we still haven't figured out if this personnel can actually adapt to Todd Monken's air raid offense. So that's going to be very interesting to see. Andrew Cooper in the chat with a big old bucket. I would also agree with that with Derrick Henry. So will we see Tyler Huntley at all tonight with that hamstring ailment? Like I said, I think that we may see a lot more Todd Johnson. And then finally, will Todd Monken's air raid offense come together? We kind of need to see everybody in order to know if this is going to work out, right? We need to see Odell Beckham. We need to see Zay Flowers. We need to see Rashad Bateman, who just came back to practice earlier this week. Isaiah Likely left last week's preseason game with a little bit of hamstring tightness. So how is this all going to gel together? I will be very interesting to see that. And I'm kind of on the lookout for Emmanuel Forbes, Washington's pick out of Mississippi State, who is the best ball hawk corner out of this entire draft class. So can they hold it together? Going to be interesting to see. A couple other things to finish up here. Let's look at some injury news. Miami Dolphins running back Devon Achane remains fifth on the depth chart despite seeing a ton of playing time. And he came away from the game on Saturday with a shoulder injury that may hold him back for the first couple of weeks. Right now, he's officially listed as week to week. So, although it's not thought to be serious and keep him out of the game, for very long, if he can't climb up that depth chart, some of us who are spending some decently high draft capital on him may be in trouble for the first few weeks. Another exciting rookie, Tank Dell, who we all fell in love with after the first preseason game, was experiencing some hamstring tightness, so he was held out of this weekend's preseason game, but luckily it's not expected to be anything serious. The Bills' backup offensive tackle, Tommy Doyle, was carted off with a season ending injury this weekend against the Steelers. And as we mentioned earlier, the depth of the Bills' offensive line was already concerning. Now, with Doyle out, it gets pretty precarious. Miles Jack, who just signed with the Eagles a few weeks ago, has actually announced his retirement. So he was placed on the reserve retired list after just joining the team, opening up the way for Nakobe Dean and some of these young Georgia Bulldogs to make their presence known. Finally, Seattle's backup quarterback Drew Lock left Saturday's preseason game with a knee injury. Not super concerning unless you're in a deep dynasty league, but it's something to watch nonetheless in case something happens to Geno Smith. So to keep up on all these injury updates, these training camp updates, make sure to go to fantasyalarm.com/draft, get a copy of our draft guide, follow our training camp battle report, our injury report, all of these articles that we've got going updated, full swing as draft season gets closer and closer and closer. I cannot wait. Or if you're interested in getting the draft guide and the cheat sheet for free, sign up for Fantasy Alarm's All Pro package. The All Pro package contains DFS, our playbook, our lineup generator, every sport, everything that you're going to need for this season. To get that and a 7-day free trial to that package, go to fantasyalarm.com/allpro to sign up today. All right. So as I mentioned earlier, we've got a very special guest coming in today. Dustin Ludke, the content director at Dynasty Pros FF and a contributor at Dynasty Nerds. So if he's ready, let's go ahead and bring him on in. Hey, Dustin, how's it going?
Britt, it is great to see you. Happy to be on. Thanks for having me on. I'm looking forward to today.
Yeah, I'm so excited to have you. It was amazing meeting you at the expo and hanging out with you after seeing you in the chat and on Twitter. Always when you get to have those face-to-face interactions after the internet interactions, you're like, okay, I like this guy. They're cool.
Yeah, hashtag team chat, Dame and Scampers. It was great to meet them at the expo. You, Coop, meet everyone. That was my first expo. So getting to meet all these people that I've interacted with on shows, some people I've done shows with and, seen them on video. Some people just seen in chats. Some people have interactions on Twitter. So it's great to meet people that you like on the internet, but then to like them in real life is even better.
And that's the thing about the fantasy football community, right? You kind of get nervous a little bit, like, is everybody going to be the same as they are online when you meet them in person? But the expo, I cannot talk highly enough about everybody there that you met, including yourself, which is why I have to get you on the show. So I'm so glad to have you on here. But you do a lot of Dynasty content, obviously. I'm somebody who's a little bit new to the Dynasty scene, partially because I'm so impatient. I don't like to take care of a team. I want to start over all the time. But let's get into a little bit of these preseason games before we dive completely into Dynasty. So there were lots of preseason games this week with a ton of surprises. Who were some of the players that you were touting in the offseason who may potentially be on your Dynasty radar who lived up to their expectations?
So Coop, hold earmuffs, Coop. Isaiah Hodgins for the Giants. I've been on him. I was the leader of that bandwagon. I wrote about him November 16th last year. Came on after my article came out and had 4 straight weeks of touchdowns. I like what I've seen so far in the preseason. I mean, this past week, he had 2 receptions on 3 targets, 45 yards. He seems like he has that chemistry with Daniel Jones, but also is getting passes from Tyrod Taylor. So I'm not worried about an instance of, the starter goes down and the backup comes in with different chemistry with different receivers. We know the Giants have a ton of slot guys. They have a bunch of guys that are 6 foot and under. Isaiah Hodgins is 6'4". He should be the red zone threat. He's also that big body receiver for third downs. I have questions about Darren Waller's durability. So I'm looking at Isaiah Hodgins to be the guy that I've been touting for a while to really continue to play well this year. I think he's going to pay dividends. He's going like end of drafts if he's getting drafted at all in redraft leagues. So I was telling people pick him up last year, and if you did, I think you're super happy with what we've seen so far. And then I've been a Trask truther this whole offseason. I'm on Kyle Trask bandwagon. I like what I saw in the game where he started. He didn't play great coming in as backup. He went 6 for 10. He had an interception, only 99 yards. But when he played 26 of 28, 218 yards and a touchdown, I think he got into the rhythm of it a little bit. He's learned from Tom Brady for 2 years. That's pretty good experience to get. I know Tom Brady is not necessarily known for being the most let me mentor this young guy mentality, but I think Tom Brady got there at the end. But just seeing Tom Brady and the way he handles himself, the way he practices, the way he prepares, I think has helped Kyle Trask. People forget that Kyle Trask was really good in college. He was 5th in the Heisman voting that year. That's pretty good. That's a pretty good pedigree. Yes, he didn't win the Heisman, but I think Trask should get the starting job. But if he doesn't, he will start by week 5 or week 9. They have a bye week, I think, in week 4, or maybe it's week 5 and 6. And then week 8, they play a Thursday night game, so they have a longer break going into week 9. So I see Kyle Trask as the leader of that team going forward. And for dynasty purposes, if he's just okay, they don't have to take Caleb Williams. They can stick with Kyle Trask and draft a receiver to replace Mike Evans or Chris Godwin, or draft an offensive lineman. It gives them options. So I'm really happy with the way Kyle Trask is going. Last one, my guy from the combine, Roschon Johnson. I loved him at the combine. I fell in love with the dude just talking to him. Him and Zay Flowers were the two most brightest personalities. What I've seen from Roschon Johnson in that Bears backfield, which is murky, right? It's Deontay Foreman, it's Khalil Herbert, who I also love. What I've seen from Roschon Johnson is 3.7 yards per carry in week 1, 4.6 yards per carry this week. That's pretty good for someone who's a rookie, who's coming in. He can pass catch. I think he has a chance to really winning that number 1 job, if not week 1, but definitely midway through the season.
Yeah, and that was a big knock on him when rookie minicamp started, right? That he wasn't good at pass protection, that he really needed to improve. But just seeing that week 1 to week 2 improvement and getting him out there, that he's catching on very quickly. As far as Trask goes, it seems like Dave Canales wants to go with the guy who emphasizes ball security.
Yep.
And for me, that is Trask hands down by 1,000.
Hands down.
Baker Mayfield is erratic at best with the ball. And then Isaiah Hodgins. I make this joke saying that New York has been kind of the elephant graveyard for slot receivers, and that's all they've got on their roster aside from Waller and Hodges. So love all of those takes. But I want to get to a little bit of negative here, because we got to have a little yin and yang after Coop's tight end yin and yang in the last hour. So on the flip side, who has disappointed you so far in this preseason?
As you can tell, I'm a Bills fan. James Cook has really let me down. Now, I've said for the longest time, I think it's going to be more of a 50-50 split between James Cook and Damian Harris. Damian Harris has been banged up, so I thought we would see a lot more out of James Cook. We just haven't seen it. And last year, everybody liked him because he had a 5.7 yards per carry. This year in the preseason, he's at one yard per carry the first game. He had 5 the second game, but he just hasn't exploded. We don't see those Twitter highlight clips like we see of Jalen Warren. We're not seeing that from him on a team that really needs to run the ball to protect Josh Allen. And you've already brought up their offensive line concerns. I just thought we'd see more with him getting the bulk of the carries. He's just not showing me anything that makes him special. I don't see the pass catching work there. He literally ran 0 routes last week. 0. So a guy who everyone was touting as a pass catcher, which I don't know why we were touting him as a pass catcher, because I didn't see that in his production, that run 0 routes is concerning. They're not even at least trying to see what he does in that pass catching. And then former Bill Devin Singletary, I was really happy to see him sign with the Texans. I was hoping he'd do well. He's underwhelmed, and Dameon Pierce seems like he's taking over that role. I thought there was a chance Singletary could take over there. Dameon Pierce is not good at pass blocking, but Singletary has looked slow, looked unexplosive, looked very mediocre there. And with that, I'm very disappointed in CJ Stroud. I think he was the best quarterback in this draft. I still think he is, but he has not played well. I mean, interception basically his first play in the first week. This past week, he went 7 for 12 for like hardly any yards. Just not showing me anything. There's no scrambling, which was we thought there wasn't going to be. We thought maybe there was because that last game in college, he hasn't really, again, no highlights worthy plays. I think they've named him the starter, but Davis Mills is still there, who's a capable player who won some games last year. So Houston, I've had high hopes for Houston for the past 2 years, and I think they're going to let us down again if they can't turn these things around. If Singletary and CJ Stroud can't take that step and be average, then I think Houston's in it for a thing. Right now, they're looking below average. I'm just hoping they can get to average and they can pay some dividends on draft cost right now.
Yeah, like that meme of the stick poking. Just
Yep.
do something.
Do
Just
something.
do
Yes,
something.
do something.
You don't have to do anything out of this world. Just do something.
I just
That's
need
all we
CJ
want.
Stroud to be Kirk Cousins. Like, I don't need him to be Aaron Rodgers. Just be Kirk Cousins. Be Jared Goff. Like, just be okay. That's good enough for fantasy. Like, that'll be a value for you in fantasy. Right now, he's doing nothing.
Yeah, it's super disappointing. Honestly, I've not been impressed with a lot of these rookie quarterbacks. And with Anthony Richardson not starting yesterday, I'm like, I don't even know what to expect out of him. So it's going to be very interesting to see how all of those rookies play out. But one last question about rookies. Is there anyone flying under the radar that people should keep their eye on, either in redraft or in Dynasty?
Not so much rookies, but I will give you a name. And Coop, you can take your earmuffs off for this one, Coop. Daniel Bellinger, tight end for the Giants. I'm not saying Waller is injury prone, but Waller has a history of injuries. And sometimes people are just more prone to injuries than others. And he's 30 years old. He's up there. Daniel Bellinger has the chemistry with Daniel Jones. So I think he could be a guy that's a sneaky tight end play. And then I'm curious to see what happens with Michael Carter from the Jets. He could get the Elijah Moore treatment of, you're odd man out. We're going to ship you off. They just signed Dalvin Cook. They obviously have Brees Hall. A running back needy team could come in and trade for Michael Carter right before week one, week two, and he could go to a team and be a starter. And we've seen him do well as a team starter. So I'm looking to see where he goes for redraft, because I think you could get him pretty low, pretty cheap right now.
Yeah, and in college, he started over Javonte Williams. He
Yep.
was the guy. So I definitely think that talent's there. He's just kind of been lost in that shuffle that is the Jets backfield. So one last question before we get into your article, and this is a personal preference. I know how I feel about it, but how do you feel about trade bait? Is that just a red flag saying, I don't like this player, please take him off my hands? Or is there some validity to putting a player in your trade bait?
Yeah, if you put a guy on the trade block, you're basically saying, like, take him off my hands. And you're basically saying he's at a discount. You can't put a guy out there and go, well, I want top dollar for him. You're shopping him around. So therefore, the price, you automatically lower the price when you put him out there. I'm not a fan of doing it. I will sometimes throw one guy out there to try to get someone, at least get that conversation started, and then go, well, what about this guy, the guy I really want to trade? So I might do a little bait and switch on that action of, let me throw out, if I want to trade Tyreek Hill, I might throw out an Amon-Ra St. Brown, and people go on, I go, okay, I don't want to trade him. How about Tyreek Hill? And they go, oh, I'd love to get Tyreek Hill. And you can kind of manipulate the situation that way. But yeah, I agree with you that if they're on the trade market, if they're on the trade block, that just says, hey, discounted price, come take them off my team, and I'm not going to give you top dollar for them.
Yeah, I think it's very silly myself. So I'm glad that you agree and that I'm not just being jaded and cynical about the trade bait block. So let's get into one of your articles, which I really enjoyed, Fantasy Therapy, which I read it and I was like, oh my gosh, this answers all of the questions that I have as a new Dynasty player. And so it got me thinking, as somebody who is fairly new to Dynasty, about a few questions. So how do you approach Dynasty startups? Are you the person who wants to win now? You don't mind drafting older players and then you'll try and trade for younger assets later? Or are you kind of willing to sit back and wait until these younger assets develop and then just have a powerhouse later on?
Yeah, let me talk about my article first. So there's two parts out. There's part one and part two. So it's Fantasy Therapy. It's basically reads as a person coming into a counselor's office, and he basically talks about fantasy football, and then he diagnosed them. So Part one's the egomaniac, part two is the shopaholic. It kind of was my way of looking at strategy and kind of the pitfalls we fall into as fantasy players when we get into certain leagues. So when it comes to a startup and any of my team builds, I have what I call the browse method. So it's balance, reliability, and opportunity with spikes and excitement. So BROWSE. So I like to balance my team. Now, depending on your risk level, you might skew it one way or the other. So I want reliable players. I want those veterans who are going to score points, who I know I can count on. Patrick Mahomes is great. You know what you're going to get from him. Whereas on the other side, spikes and excitement, that might be Anthony Richardson. We don't know, but you just might be excited. So when I'm looking at my position groups, I'm going to balance those. So if I'm going, a dynasty startup, I might want 4 quarterbacks. I'm going to take 2 of the reliable. I might take, a Jared Goff and a Kirk Cousins because they're reliable, they're steady. You're not super excited about them, but then I might take someone like Anthony Richardson or a Clayton Tune that's going to be excited if they start and it all becomes this value. That's how I balance my teams when I do startups. So I'm okay having that balance. If you're in let's say a Scott Fishbowl, I think you skew it more towards that excitement and spikes end of it because you want that because you got to differentiate. Like having a Kirk Cousins is great in a Scott Fishbowl tournament of 3,000 plus people, but that doesn't win you tournaments. And even in best ball, you want those spike week guys. You want a guy that's going to go off and rush for 100 yards. You want kind of the Justin Fields from last year. You don't want Jared Goff. So I try to balance that. I'm definitely let the draft come to me. I generally don't trade up, but I will trade back. I'm a tier-based drafter, so if I'm looking and go, man, I'm at the 5 spot and there's 4 running backs I want, can I trade back 2 spots and pick up a third next year? I'll do that. But I'm definitely more of the browse. So it's balance, reliability, and opportunity with spikes and excitement. That's how I build my teams.
Everybody clip that. Get your notebook out. Write that down because that is the best acronym that I've ever heard.
And honestly, that all goes to Coop with his yin yang and his sort, start, opportunity, roster, talent. When I was thinking that, I just came up with this maybe a month or 2 ago. I haven't fleshed it out in an article yet, but that's the way I think about things.
Well, it sounds genius, and I love it. But you mentioned running backs in there, and this is something that I kind of had a hard time dealing with when I first started doing Dynasty because with the current landscape in the NFL surrounding running backs, it seems like in Dynasty they get a little bit undervalued. So, how do you approach their value in Dynasty? Do you want like the bell cow with potential of maybe trading him later, or what do you look at with running backs?
So age is everything, right? We've seen this, right? If you're a 26-year-old running back like Devin Singletary or Miles Sanders, you get a contract pretty easily. But if you're 28, Zeke, Fournette, Kareem Hunt, even Jamal Williams and Samaje Perine, not so easy to get a contract. I like to go with my running backs in that reliability and opportunity. So I love Rachaad White because he's going to get that volume. He's going to have the opportunities to do it. Yes, he may only get you 3 yards per carry, but if he gets 20 carries a game, I'll take that over a guy who's going to get me 5 yards a carry, but is only going to get 10, right? Like it's just different. Like Rachaad White's going to get you 6 yards, the other guy's going to get you 50. I'll take those opportunities, especially with running backs. So I'm looking at age, especially in dynasty startups in my running back. So someone like Najee Harris, who's older, even though he's only a second year compared to someone Javonte Williams, who's like 2 years younger, because that does pan out later on. And then I look at volume just in terms of the wear and tear on their tires. We keep expecting Derrick Henry to fall off, but I look at guys like Kareem Hunt just has a ton of wear and tear in his tires, probably why he doesn't get a contract. I look at guys, like Zeke has a ton, but he got a contract late. So it's one of those things where I think that played into their factor of why they didn't get contracts with it, because they're definitely going to be some banged up running backs who get hurt. Running backs get injured more than any other position in the league because they get banged up all the time. They're just getting hit left and right. So I look at wear and tear and I look at age.
Well, and we've seen it with Donta Foreman, right? The
Yep.
past 2 seasons, he came in for Derrick Henry, had an excellent season. Last year after CMC got traded, came in, had an excellent season. So he's a little bit older, but doesn't have necessarily that wear and tear. So that's that balance that I think is very good to look at, that people don't always do it. Scott, great to see you in the chat. Good morning. I hope you got some good rest out there in Vegas. So earlier, Dustin, you mentioned future picks and trades. How do you evaluate future picks versus current players and assets when looking at trades? So in other words, why trade away a player just to get the same type of player next year? How does that benefit you?
I look at everything as assets. So every player and every pick is an asset, and what's their value? What's their trend going to be? So early this offseason, when I was doing the Dynasty startups, I was like, let me get Trey Lance, let me get DeAndre Hopkins, because you knew their market was up, but you knew at some point they're going to spike. So when DeAndre Hopkins signed, now he signed with not the best opportunity in system, right? But had DeAndre Hopkins signed with the Patriots, and you're like, okay, he's the number one, or had he signed with San Francisco or Denver, one of these other like high powered offenses that you were happy with, his value speaks. So yes, you could trade. Can you trade Amon St. Brown for 2 first next year? Yes. I look at it and go, okay, what do those first net me? Can I get an Amon St. Brown? Probably, but those assets picks to me always increase in value, right? The 2024 picks are at their lowest value right now. Tomorrow they're going to be worth a little more, and they're just going to keep getting a little more. And then we get to draft season and they're worth a ton. So I look at it that way, and I look at what I'm trying to do with my team, balance that, go back to that browse system. What am I trying to do? Do I need more reliability? Do I need a solid producer now, or can I trade away a guy? If I have a guy that's on my bench and I can get a second round for him, like why not? Like he's not starting for me. It comes down to points in my lineup. If the guy's not ever going to crack my lineup and he's just sitting there and he's rotting away on my bench, yeah, that's great that I have him. But if I never play him and I can get a pick that I can definitely move forward to, that's where it is. I think what we get into with dynasties, we get to this point where people are always future focused and they miss out on now, or people get solid now and they miss the future. You do have to balance those things. But I'm looking at production in my lineup. What can I get for you? And is this person ever going to crack my lineup? So I'm not going to trade a 3rd round pick for, a guy that's never going to crack my lineup. What for? I might as well just wait and draft a guy. You also have to balance production versus youth. Like, what are you getting out of those trades? If you're trying to rebuild, then maybe you want the youth. You just want to take the picks and get rid of some older guys. So maybe you do trade a Derrick Henry or a Tyreek Hill, right? Tyreek Hill has said he's retiring in 2 years. Maybe now's the time to trade him, get some picks. Yes, you're missing out this year, but it sets you up for 24 and 25 to win.
So with everything, it just depends, right?
Yep. Everything just depends. Yep.
Fantasy football is such a funny game. Everything just all depends. But that is very good advice, because I struggle a lot with balancing out my assets and futures and things like that. And something that I also struggle with is when to just like let a player go, because some players just don't pan out. I saw something, I think it was in our Fantasy Alarm Discord, about should I just cut Clyde Edwards-Helaire? Nobody wants him. Is anybody even going to trade for him? So when do you decide how to just cut a player loose versus trying to trade them and, even just sweeten up a package a little bit?
So I do a monthly article called Dynasty Future Reports over at QB List. And I give you 5 players to kind of look out for in the future. It's where I wrote about Isaiah Hodgins. But I also give you 5 players that you should hold and 5 players you should cut. And a lot of times when I'm looking at the players to cut, I look at their pathway to opportunity. Is there a new coach, a new regime? Because let's face it, if a guy's on a new coach with a new coaching system, whether that's a new team or a new coach on that team, they didn't draft them. They don't have any they're not beholden to that guy at all. They can cut them, they can move them. New quarterback's kind of the same way. If you're a receiver or a pass catching back, you don't want a receiver who got a new QB that now they have to build chemistry with. That's just not ideal. I look at that. I look and see where that fit is. So I also look at contracts. If you're on a team, let's say Michael Carter's a perfect example, right? They drafted Breece Hall, they signed Dalvin Cook. Where's Michael Carter? Where's his pathway to opportunities? It's injury, which is hard to predict. Maybe it's next year after Dalvin Cook's gone after a year. I don't know if I want to hold him. I might hold him just for the opportunity of maybe this year and see what happens. But at some point we get to this part where we're just going, yeah, they're so talented. They're so talented. They're going to play. If they haven't played already, they're not going to. We see very few players be good on a team with either a new coach or on a new team. Like once that regime changes, it's not happening. It happens. And then once they're on their 3rd team, I'm out. I'm out totally. Like no one's ever really been that great on their 3rd team or the 3rd coach. It just isn't. That's a red flag. And that's where I just cut them. Like Clyde Edwards-Helaire, I'm out. Now I'll shop them. I'll shop them around for 2 weeks and go, anybody want to give me a 4th? Right. I think you can use some of the trade calculators out there. We have one on Dynasty Pros. Alex Peaked in High School does a great trade value chart where he compiles everything together. Look at the value and go, okay, I'll trade him for a 3rd. my first Dynasty fantasy therapy was about being the egomaniac and not admitting when you're wrong. It's okay to be wrong on a player. It's okay to say, hey, I loved, N'Keal Harry coming out and I had a ton of them and then he just sucked and now he's still in the league. So you're like, are you still holding him? No, like you have to set expectations and go, okay, he didn't meet that. It's time to move on. And you shop him for a couple weeks, but then to me, Clyde Edwards-Helaire is that roster turning spot at the bottom. Like if there's a hot waiver pickup, he's the guy that goes because you're just not. We just hold out hope forever. We can't do that.
Is there a threshold of like a hard cut line? If player X hasn't done anything in X amount of years, then you're just done with them, or does it depend on the situation?
Yeah, generally it's 3 years and I'm out. Like if they haven't done anything in years, I'm just done. And now, done anything like it? Can they flash 1 week? Sure. I'm a believer that once is a fluke, twice is a trend, three times is a pattern. Like if they can do it 3 times in a year, then I'm okay holding on to them. But if they have one good week out of 18, no, I'm not good. Even if they have two, I'm like, okay, they had a good game in week 2 and they had a good game in week 4. I'm out. Like Nicole Hardman.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, he scored the 7-yard touchdown. Whoopty freaking do. He does it twice a year. Don't care. He doesn't do it consistently enough. I'm out. I'm done. So yeah, 3 years for me is usually my cutoff. And then, like I said, if they're only doing it one time a year, twice a year, I'm out too.
Yep. I mean, look at Trey Sermon, right? We all
Yep.
held on to Trey Sermon for so long. And
For so
now
long.
he's creeping back in there because he had that, 33-yard touchdown or whatever in preseason. And some of us are like, oh, maybe I should hold on to him a little bit longer. But yeah, I think that
I'm out.
3-year line is exactly correct. Yeah, you should be out on Sermon. Talking a little bit more about trade packages, when you're trading away a star player, how much do packages come into play? Like, where do you draw the line with opposing teams just offering like kind of a smorgasbord and grab bag of kind of unwanted assets? How do you balance that out? Because I tend to see that all the time. Like, oh, I want Justin Jefferson and I'm going to trade you like Tyler Boyd and like, Chase Claypool and a couple picks and da 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 da. How do you balance that out and know whether or not it's a good trade?
I mean, trade calculators are a great guideline, but again, they're guidelines, not rules. For me, am a no more than three to one. So if I'm giving you one player, if you want to give me 3 assets in return, that's my max. If you try to give me 4 or 5, no, you need to increase those assets. I think it comes down to me by points in my lineup. So if I'm trading away Justin Jefferson and you're giving me DJ Moore and this guy and this guy and this guy, well, those guys aren't fitting in my lineup. Like I'm only freeing up one roster spot. Now, I may have crappy wide receivers after Justin Jefferson, and I can fit 2 of those guys in. But if Justin Jefferson's getting me 18 points a week, I need that trade to net me in my starting lineup at least 18 points with potential upside. And you need to be trading for either youth or production. And for me, if I'm not getting the youth or production, I'm out. So 3-to-1 trades, I'm fine with. Anything more than that, I'm out. So when they're like, I'll give you all these picks, unless they're first and second round picks, I'm out. So that's for me my guideline. 3-to-1 if it's a superstar. Lower once you get past like tier 2, tier 3 disposition, it's a 2-to-1 trade. I'm not taking a bunch of like, I don't need 4 fourth-round picks for a guy that's just not going to do anything for me. Unless I believe that I'm an active trader and you're in a league where there's a ton of trading, then maybe I will. But those leagues are few and far between where you just see a ton of trades. I'm in one league where we have a guy who made 70 trades last year, so I know I can pick up picks. Yeah, it was crazy. He did like a 3-person trade, a four-way trade. It was an absolute mayhem. But I know if I get picks, I know I can always trade with him. So that league, I might take a 4-to-1 trade just if I'm getting extra picks because I know it's an active marketplace. Generally in Dynasty, your economy is very slow. Trades very rarely happen. So 3-to-1's my max usually. And then, like I said, if you're not getting guys that are going into your starting lineup and you're taking someone out, it's probably not worth it.
Oh man, think about the commissioner in those leagues with like 4-way trades. Let's not do that
Yeah.
and be a headache for your commissioner. They work very hard, guys.
Yeah.
So a couple more here before we get to some hypotheticals. So this one is particularly selfish for me. Say you took over an orphan team that needs some major help. What are some things that you would recommend to help rebuild this very non-competitive team that are realistic?
Yeah. Waiver wires is obviously key, like hitting that hard, especially early in the season. And then for me, it's buying into the hype. So looking at contracts, but also looking at where that hype's going. So I've done a lot of success picking up backup quarterbacks every Sunday. So I get a guy that's out, I move my IR, pick up backup quarterback. So I picked up Colt McCoy last year, traded him for a 3rd round pick when Kyler went down because the guy needed a quarterback. It was a super flex league. Actually, it's a 3-quarterback league. We have 2 quarterbacks and a super flex. So being active, like, it was a free 3rd-round pick. It was like me picking up a 3rd-round pick off waivers. But looking at hype, so when you look at, hey, who's on a contract year this year, take their backup, right, and build for next year. And then I think you have to set a goal of, when's your goal for when you're no longer rebuilding? Is it 24 or is it 25 or is it 26? If you're saying, hey, my team's really bad, I don't think I can be competitive till 2025, you can get 2025 picks fairly cheap right now. Like, you can get a first and a second for a first next year. Like, that's crazy to me. So it's all about setting that goal and being realistic with it. But I think hitting those waiver wires, then looking at those hype trains. Like I said, I picked up DeAndre Hopkins early in startup drafts because I knew at some point he was going to get cut and he's going to sign. Trey Lance obviously didn't work out that way for me because I thought he would hopefully start or he'd get traded. But if you can ride those waves of hype and sell high, so you can pick a guy up now low, that's, if Treylon Burks is hurt, maybe you can get him low and then sell him when he's back up, and when that hype picks back up for him. So really realizing the trends in those players' hype and their spikes in their value really helps you capitalize when you're rebuilding.
All such good advice here, guys. I'm taking mental notes. I wish that I had my notepad here to write all this down. If you're just now joining us, Dustin, Ludke, we're about to get you out of here because it's already been almost 30 minutes.
Oh,
it's
my
crazy. So time flies when you're having fun. So one last thing here before the hypothetical trades. Let's talk about lateral trading, because that is one thing that honestly kind of drives me nuts. The trade seems fair on its face, but are you really doing anything to make your team better? So what are the pitfalls of lateral trading and how do you prevent falling into that trap?
First off, I'll say, if trading makes fantasy fun, do it. And if getting your guys makes it fun, like, I'm a Bills fan, so if I can trade Mahomes for Josh Allen and that's a lateral trade because I got my guy, do it. I look at my trades as positional trades. So if I'm trading you a wide receiver and I'm getting a wide receiver back, what does that do for my position group? Is that allow me a little more flexibility? Does it give me anything? And then you have to either get, what are you gaining from a trade? Are you gaining production this year or youth? And if you're not getting one of the other, what's the worth of trading? Like, what's the point of trading Justin Jefferson for Jamar Chase? Like, they're pretty much equal in production, pretty much equal in age. Maybe you have questions about Justin Jefferson's quarterback going forward. Okay, but you're not doing anything. You're not benefiting. You're not gaining anything. So you have to either gain production this year or youth for the future. If you're not doing that, the trade's not worth it.
Yep, absolutely agree. All right, let's hit up some hypothetical trades before I get you out of here. Again, for very selfish reasons, and you have so much great insight. So there was a trade for Jordan Loves and Stephon Diggs for Desmond Ridder and Amon-Ra St. Brown. This one to me,
I would love. Go ahead.
I was just going to say this one to me feels slightly lateral, but as I keep looking at it, it feels like there's one side that has the edge.
Yeah, I'll take the Ridder Amon-Ra St. Brown side. Like, you get the youth. I think Diggs has 3 more years left on him. Jordan Love and Desmond Ridder are both question marks. We don't know what they are, but you do get a couple more years out of Desmond Ridder because he's a second-year player where Jordan Love's in his 3rd year. So you get 1 or 2 more years. I'll take the extra years on Amon-Ra St. Brown, who I think is a lateral production-wise this year from Stephon Diggs, but I'll take that positional youth advantage out of that side. And I'm big on Desmond Ridder, and I'm kind of low on Jordan Love right now.
That's where I'm at too. Travis Etienne and Christian Watson for Christian McCaffrey and a 2024 second.
Ooh, that's tough. I think I would take McCaffrey because I think you get that production bump this year. I don't see that from Etienne, who I like, but I think Bigsby's going to eat in that. I'm not a huge fan of Christian Watson. I think Romeo Doubs is the better receiver to have in that offense right now. Again, huge question marks there. So that's a red flag for Christian Watson. What's Jordan Love look like? We haven't seen Christian Watson in the preseason. So I'll take the production bump from Christian McCaffrey this year because I'm gaining production this year from that and probably next year as well from that trade with the CMC side.
It's like we have one brain. All right, one final one. Kenny Pickett for Jahan Dotson.
So this is one when you sent me the notes, I saw this one. I'll actually take Jahan Dotson. Mm-hmm. I like the youth. Now, this is assuming it's a 1-quarterback league. It's super flex, you're taking Kenny Pickett. But in a 1-quarterback league, Kenny Pickett is just average, and you can get average quarterbacks in 1-quarterback leagues off waivers or in the draft. So I'll take Jahan Dotson, who has potential to be a weekly wide receiver 2 for your starting lineup every week. So I'll take that production bump because I think you can find equal production for Kenny Pickett elsewhere.
I love it. Again, same brain. So much good information. I wish I could have you on here for so much longer and just pick your brain because you have so much insight into Dynasty. But thank you so much for coming on. Remind everybody where they can find you and what you've got coming up.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter or X or whatever we're calling it nowadays. I'm just gonna keep calling it Twitter.
It's
Is that
Twitter.
okay?
It's Twitter.
It's Twitter at the D Unit 13. I post all my articles. I'm the content director for Dynasty Pros. So my fantasy therapies are over there. The first two are out. There's about 6 or 7 planned for the series that'll be coming out sporadically. I also do contribute for Dynasty Nerds. I contribute with QB List, so I have a monthly Dynasty article over there that'll be coming out towards the end of the month. I also help out with Front Office Pros, so you'll catch me on some podcasts there, and I'll be on with Jim Coventry on Saturday. So if you're checking out there, I'll be on Saturday, I think at like 11 o'clock with him. I can't remember if it's Eastern or Standard. I'm in Central, so these East Coast times mess me up all the time. But yeah, I'm everywhere. Twitter's the best place to find me because I post everything there.
That sounds great. Again, thank you so much for joining me. And I hope to see you again soon and talk more Dynasty.
Thanks for having me on,
All
Britt.
right. Thanks. We'll talk later. All right, guys. Britt's Fantasy Blitz is sponsored by Underdog Fantasy and the biggest fantasy football tournament of all time, the Best Ball Mania 4. If you don't know what Best Ball is, it's simple. You just enter the Best Ball Mania on Underdog's mobile app, you draft your team, and that's it. Best Ball Mania 4 is your shot at a first place prize of $3 million. Yes, $3 million to first place. So if you want to sign up for Underdog, go to fantasyalarm.com/underdog or via the App Store, sign up with promo code ALARM, and get your first deposit doubled up to $100. That's 4 free entries into this Best Ball Mania 4 contest just for making your first time deposit. And again, that promo code is ALARM. So we're going to talk a little bit about some Underdog stats for tonight to finish out the show. I want to talk a little bit about the preseason game tonight because preseason stats are always so much fun. We want to see how these players are going to end up, how much time they're going to play. And Underdog gives you the opportunity to enter a pick'em contest, which is great. So I have a couple picked out for the NFL preseason tonight. One of them is Josh Johnson higher than 83 and a half passing yards. We mentioned it on early on in the show that Tyler Huntley is suffering from a hamstring injury and Lamar Jackson probably won't play much. So that leaves Josh Johnson as the guy to take the majority of the snaps. Even against Washington's rebuilt secondary, I expect him to have a decent amount of yards just because of volume. So again, I'm going higher on that. Second, I've got Chris Rodriguez Jr. higher than 28.5 rushing and receiving yards. With Antonio Gibson and Brian Robinson both set in their roles, I expect to see a lot of Chris Rodriguez tonight. The rookie out of Kentucky is averaging 7.8 yards per carry, admittedly with only 5 carries this preseason, but it's still a pretty good start. But that combined with the receiving stat makes me lean higher all the way. Next, on the Ravens side, I have Justice Hill higher than 29.5 rushing and receiving yards. In the first preseason game of the year, Hill received every snap on the first 2 drives of the game before Gus Edwards made his appearance. And among those snaps was a 37-yard run down the line. So if he gets some work tonight, I really, really love these combined stats. Next, I've got Sam Howell lower than 75.5 passing yards. Again, we talked a little bit about it at the beginning. We don't know how much we're going to see Sam Howell since he's already been named the starter. The Commanders want to give Howell the start tonight to give him some experience before the start of the season, but I really don't see him playing a ton. They definitely want to avoid some injury, so I think he gets a couple series before he gets pulled and doesn't see enough time to hit higher than that 75 and a half yard stat. So I am going lower. Finally, I've got Tylan Wallace lower than 27.5 receiving yards. In the first preseason game, Wallace played primarily out of the slot, but out of those 7 snaps and 4 routes run, he didn't see a single target on any of that. I know that 27.5 isn't a big stat, but I really think that we see more from guys like Nelson Aguilar and Devin Duvernay in place of him. If you don't like these stats, you can jump on over at Underdog, check out what they've got going on tonight. They add some all the way up until game time, and you can take your pick. You can combine these, pick between 2 and 5, enter that into your pick'em contest, and make your deposit. And if you hit on every single one of them, then you're good to go. I know that this is a fantasy football show, but I want to talk a little bit about some MLB because Underdog also has pick 'em lines for all other sports. So for one, I really like Aaron Nola lower than 34.5 fantasy points. Over his past 3 games, Nola has topped out at 30 fantasy points, and tonight he's facing the Giants. He's given up the fourth most home runs of any pitcher this season, and while the Giants haven't been power hitters, Nola is giving up an average of 2.4 home runs per game. The last 7 games, he's looked kind of bad, and his ERA is all the way up to 5.36. So I am taking the lower here. Next, I've got Bryce Harper higher than 1.5 hits, runs, and RBIs. Yes, that is all combined. How could you not like this stat? Harper has 20 hits and 64 at bats against the San Francisco pitching staff. And I think with this combined number tonight, that he can go higher. So again, sign up, go to fantasyalarm.com/underdog, use the promo code ALARM, and first-time users get a 100% deposit match up to $100. Along with these pick'em contests, they are also running best ball contests, including Best Ball Mania 4, weekly contests, and their new weekly winners best ball. There is honestly something out there for everyone, so get on over there and check it out. If you are not in our Fantasy Alarm Discord, Alarm Fantasy Football is also running some best ball contest for our Fantasy Alarm members. To sign up for our Discord, you guessed it, go to fantasyalarm.com/allpro, sign up for our All Pro package where you get a 7-day free trial, and then join our Discord, jump in the NFL Best Ball channel, and sign up for some of those contests that we will be running Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday from the 2 o'clock to 3 o'clock hour. Again, like Dustin said, I'm in Central, so the timeline gets a little iffy. If anybody else has anything else in the chat, I would love to hear from you. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Trey in the chat, I will love to rate your draft right after this show. We went through a bunch of stuff today, guys. We've got only 2.5 weeks until the football season starts. We've got a lot of action going on tonight. Drafts are kicking up. Make sure to go to Fantasy Alarm and get your copy of the draft guide. It's a living draft guide. It's got updates to the injury reports, the training camp reports, all the ADP tiers, everything that you will need for your draft. If you kind of want to cram, like admittedly I've done in college, then just grab our cheat sheet. You can get that by itself. It's got tiers for PPR leagues, for auction leagues, for half PPR, 14 teams, 12 teams, whatever you need, it's included in that cheat sheet. The upcoming BSN schedule, make sure to stay tuned 3 to 4 p.m. Eastern time for the fantasy football game show from Front Yard Fantasy. From 4 to 5 p.m. Eastern, the Better Sports Betting with myself and Howard Bender today. And then 5 to 6 p.m. Eastern, the MLB DFS live stream with James Grande and John Mpemba. Michael Chasko has a question in the chat before we get out of here real quick. He has to make a keeper decision, Waddle or Brees for the next 2 years. I am leaning towards keeping Waddle because of the fact that Tyreek Hill has mentioned that he wants to retire, that wide receivers typically have a longer shelf life in dynasty leagues than running backs. And to be quite honest, I want to see what Brees Hall looks like after that ACL. We've seen the efficiency of running backs go down at least after their first year of ACL surgery and recovery. I would really like to see what he looks like going into this season and next year. So I think I'm still leaning Waddle. Mr. Scampers asks, have you done any home league drafts yet? And where do you like drafting from this season with one quarterback? It's funny that you ask that. I'm actually doing one tonight. It is called the Dirty Laundry League. where it is husbands and wives teaming up against each other. And that is why it's called the Dirty Laundry League. We air each other's dirty laundry. So it's very, very fun. Bunch of great people in there. I think that I used to prefer drafting from the middle because, again, I'm impatient and I don't like to wait, but I tended to turn towards the end of the draft. When I draft towards the end, I can kind of reach for the players that I want. I feel like I have more control over my draft overall. So around that 10 to 12 spot is where I really enjoy drafting. And I'm pretty excited to get started on home link drafts. We've got a ton coming up. Again, that's why you guys need to get the draft guide. There's so much great stuff in there. Michael, you're welcome. Mr. Scampers agrees. Waddle for sure. I would love for you guys to ask any more questions real fast before we get out of here. Articles this week coming up on Fantasy Alarm. We do have the player debate series. Again, the fantasy football cheat sheet has just been updated and will continue to be updated. And on Friday, on Britt's Fantasy Blitz, we are going to be joined by special guest Jeff Bell from Football Guys. So I think that that's it if you guys don't have any more questions. So oh, Scott Frankel, yes, got my boy Burks for $2 at the end of the auction. That is an excellent value, Scott. I love that so, so much. And I don't really think that Burks is going to miss much time. I know that they say 2 to 6 weeks, but I mean, Burks has dealt with injury off and on. He's a tough guy. I think he'll be back in two much sooner than that 6 week period. Ernie's asking auction superflex. Should I nominate Cousins first and try to sneak him through and hope to get a good price? You know, the thing with auctions, it really depends on who all you're drafting with because I did my first auction last year and I thought that everybody was going to be going, at the quote unquote market price. Quarterbacks went very cheap in that league. So it all depends on your league mates and their pars and their thresholds. But yeah, I think I would nominate Cousins early, especially if there are better quarterbacks floating around out there. So yeah, try it and see how it goes. I very much enjoy that. So, again, thank you so much for joining Britt's Fantasy Blitz. Join us Friday with special guest Jeff Bell, and thanks for getting blitzed.